Right, so we've mentioned this before, but anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is the attribution of human characteristics, emotions, and behaviors to animals or other non-human things. Now, for the leftist, cognitively feminine mind, that's a lot of what's going on. There's a lot of things we can tie together here. Empathetic brains, like I've said before, they live in a social world. And what this often goes hand in hand with is, well, it seems to be, the assumption that the first cause of everything, of anything and everything that you might be going through, is another person or another mind, another human mind, because you live in a human social world. It'd be nice if they could explain that themselves, but you'd probably have to be quite systematic in your thinking to even put it in that kind of language. You just feel it. It's basically the huge, writ large version of, men are logical and women are emotional. And so we were talking about this on Twitter before. The empathetic brains. It's not so much that they think, like they find patterns and relations between different pieces of data, and that's what an IQ test is pattern recognition is a big part of it. Empathetic brains, anthropomorphism. And so if you have an empathetic brain, if you have a leftist feminine, tilted towards the feminine, like we said before, most people are a mix of both, but if you're more tilted towards the feminine empathetic brain type, you tend to think that another mind or another person is the cause of things, and so you anthropomorphise a lot of phenomena. And so what that means is, if you think that things that you're going through, someone has done to you consciously and for the sake of socially lowering your status or something, like it's a social game. The same way in which women fight, like they'll gossip and bitch about each other to undermine each other. And so that's the process that they intuit, is that other people have made conscious decisions to attack them. Now, it's very interesting when you actually talk to some real dyed-in-the-wool communists. One of the things that these communists would always say is that property is theft, that for you to possess something means you've stolen it off everyone else. For you to exclusively have ownership over something, you've stolen it off everyone else. But I think it's definitely an expression of this social world thinking, whereas to say that it's the normal state of nature that I would have access to things, and if you are using them and if you're not giving it to me, then you are doing something to me. It's absolutely absurd if you put it in another example, such as if people were running in a 100-meter sprint, did the person that come first, did they steal their speed from the other person? Well, no, they didn't. They just outperformed them. And then in the West, we developed this system where if you are responsible for your gains, well, you should be able to keep your gains. But in this more, maybe it's even an expression of a familial model, like a family, where they say, okay, but if you have something, then you have to distribute it amongst your family, amongst the tribe, and often to the person that's making this comment to me. But all this comes down to is an expression of female strategy. They take as a given that if the men produce, it should be given to them. And this is, I think, comes from the fact that women, because they are necessary for reproduction, they are the bottleneck of reproduction because they carry our babies and nurture our kids, that it is part of the natural order of things that they express themselves, that it is the men who should produce and distribute to women so that they and their children can be taken care of. And if they're not being taken care of, it must be because the men aren't wishing to take care of them. They're anthropomorphizing their situation, which is really interesting. If you look at a lot of these behaviors and these statements and these ideas, and you drill down to what they are explicitly implying in their attitudes and behaviors, it's often women themselves who define gender roles, who say there are gender roles, because if women were capable of producing the same as men, then they wouldn't anthropomorphize everything. They would say, well, I have to go out and produce. Look, and a lot do. It's like a 70-30 kind of thing. It's like most people are a mix, and you've probably got 20-30% extremely male people, 20-30% extremely female people, with most people being, a pretty close mix in the middle. But there are enough in the extremes that you can see definite poles emerge in these types. But the funny thing is, though, that like I said, if you drill down to the implications of a lot of these ideas, women are explicitly saying, I don't even comprehend fighting against nature and creating resources out of nothing or out of merit. All I can comprehend is that you need to give them to me. And if I'm not being taken care of, then it must be because you don't wish to take care of me, at which point they think that you're being evil. Whereas the male looks at the female brain and goes, it's not that I don't wish to take care of you, it's just that resources have limits, and everything has a cost, and so I can't fulfill every desire that you have. And so we would look at them and think that they're stupid. And this is another thing that Kurt's talked about, is that the left thinks the right is evil because they are anthropomorphizing and thinking that they are withholding resources. If they would have everything their hearts desire if only the masculine-brained right would give it to them. But the masculine-brained right is looking at the feminine-brained left thinking that they're stupid. Because we're saying that resources are limited and there's always costs and trade-off to everything, and if you don't see that, well, what's wrong with you? You must be stupid. And so that's the basis of the left thinks the right's evil, the right thinks the left is naive or stupid. And that's also quite true, but it's once again it's a result of this left-brained, feminine-brained, empathetic, living in a social world thinking, or not so much thinking as feeling. I was talking about this on Twitter with Martin, and we're talking about the way they think. They don't really think as in take information in, develop, recognize patterns and develop mental models around information. They emotionally intuit what is high status in the herd or in their society, and then they devote themselves or obey or parrot that for the sake of getting resources and status from themselves. So it's not so much thinking as feeling. They don't so much think as feel, and that's why they seem kind of retarded to male-brained people. But another element of how this ties into religion, and Kurt said the same thing, that monotheistic religions in the past, this was the previous expression of feminine social brain undermining. It's like, version 1. And for you to think, well, God's got a plan. God's in charge. God created everything. You're literally anthropomorphizing everything. You're saying, well, the whole thing came about because of another mind, because of another being. And you have to understand that a lot of people don't and can never get the agency of going beyond, well, God's got a plan. I think the opposite of that is saying no one and nothing is going to come and save you if you don't save yourself. And so it's quite possible, as I said in my last video, that it's quite possible there is no happy ending. But that is just saying, it's basically clearly admitting, it's saying my agency has a limit. It gets to a point, and then my ability to comprehend or act on the world or create the world as I see it, I give up. It's beyond me. But it gets to a point where somebody has to do it because I don't believe God exists. Once again, I don't really wish to piss off either the religious or non-religious crowds. I'm happy to do some videos of what I think of religion. I don't think it's all bad. I think in a lot of ways it's a good way to provide mindfulness to people who can't function any other way. It's like saying that certain people have certain emotional needs and they need to be taken care of, and it's probably one of the best and most functional ways to take care of people who have that sort of emotional need. But I don't have that emotional need so much anyway. But yeah, so religion, God is anthropomorphizing everything, and it's saying, well, my destiny's out of my hands, and that is almost like, it's expecting other people and your herd and your tribe to kind of have a solution and you don't. And so once again, that's an expression of the social world, of just going, my whole concept of reality doesn't really exist past other people and other minds and society and social needs and all that sort of stuff. It's the feminine brain. It's the feminine brain. And so, what you can see is that, like in the past, that they go, okay, well, there's a flood or whatever, and God's angry. Something happens, they attribute it to another conscious mind that's made a value judgment. It's made an emotional or value-based decision to punish you or not, And communism is part 2 of that. It's part 2 of the same type of thinking. We anthropomorphize the outcomes of reality, where some people produce and some don't, and you can give to them to a degree to give them a soft landing, but you can't make them equal, because then you're just, for a variety of reasons, we all know you're killing and hamstringing the productive for the sake of raising up the unproductive. But at the core of that is the fact that resources are limited. Everybody's resources and everything is limited, and that limit, the fact that something is limited, is what they're going to anthropomorphize. Well, if you say, I can't have this because X resource or whatever is limited, well, why are you withholding it from me? And so it's the same thing now that they're doing with whiteness. As Kurt said, different groups have different levels of adaptation towards the natural laws, and scarcity being one of them. Scarcity being a natural law, scarcity of all resources and time and things like that. And so what they're doing now is they're saying, well, white people and their adaptation towards systems that acknowledge that resources are limited, well, they're withholding. They're withholding. If they would just open the floodgates on all those resources they have, then it's like we could take care of the whole world. It's feminine thinking. It's like if you would give all your resources to me and my children, then none of my children could be left behind. But because the children and their neediness keeps outbreeding our ability to produce, but they don't understand that you'd need to have a logical brain to even understand that, or they just intuit. And so the point is, they anthropomorphise white people now. They in the past, with religion, they'd anthropomorphise nature. Okay, the storm came, well, God's angry. And then under communism, property is theft. They're anthropomorphizing withholding resources and property. And now they've changed to their cultural communism. And now they're saying, well, if everyone's not equal, it's because white people are withholding. And they've anthropomorphized the natural laws and blamed it on white people. They've anthropomorphized the natural laws of scarcity and eugenics and Darwin and blamed it on white people withholding, and so we've become the devil. So, and as usual under all these systems, religions, there's that promise, there's the false promise. Well, if you devote yourself to the big consciousness, you will get heaven, you'll get freedom from whatever after death. And then communism, if you devote yourself to the party, then you'll have our utopian vision. And then it's now unfortunately the next iteration of this is if you devote yourself once again to the party, but against the devil of the whites as a proxy for the laws of scarcity, well, then we'll have our utopia. So, but yeah, look, I think the main thing is just going over again, like a lot of these feminine brain people, they don't really think, and they don't really, it's ludicrous to think that politically we should be equal. They need to be limited and they need to be led. All those times that like right-wingers are talking about information, and they're still like, debate will settle. It's like, no it won't, because you can't debate with somebody who doesn't even understand the concept of thinking, and has much less ability to put it into practice at all. I said to this guy once, we were talking about men and women and having a happy marriage, and I said to him, have you ever seen somebody happily married, a couple happily married, where they've reversed the dynamic of the provider male? And he said, I can't really say. Maybe some people, like where, the woman is more dominant, she's the breadwinner. And I'm not saying it's not possible, because you do get feminine men and masculine women. But in general, it's not something you see very often, because it just reverses that natural order. And I said to him, they do studies, I was talking about hypergamy studies, but I didn't use that word. And I said to him, if you look at women, they usually choose men who are equal or higher than them in socioeconomic status, never lower. And that's reproducible all around the world, cross-culturally. So I said to him, women, it would seem, are defining gender roles themselves by their actions. They are defining through their actions gender roles themselves. And so once again, if you have the ability to understand what they do, not what they say, you can say, well, obviously gender roles do exist because of your demonstrated preferences in what you require from men. You know, you require production and provision from men, leadership. And so what I'm trying to say as well is, if you look at all this inability to understand systems, this inability to understand the systems that make up the natural laws of scarcity. I'm just going to read up a little quote here to supplement that from Kurt on Twitter. Think of the female left mind as generating demand, which means things they want, regardless of cost, not truths. So he's just saying they generate things that they want. I want bigger house. I want to look after all the refugees. I want funding for disabled kids. I want this. I want that. And that's what they do. And then he said, think of the male right mind, male/right-wing mind, generating truths, calculating costs to fulfill demands. And what that means is, you can't, if you actually need to be systematic and understand the reality about the costs of things, you have to have truth. It's like saying, well, I'm just going to ask a bridge to stay up, or I'm going to pray to the plane to stay in the air. It's like, well, no, you don't. It's not your emotions, it's not your wishful thinking that's going to make any of these things happen in the real world. It is truth. It is mathematical engineering truth. And so when the masculine right is trying to calculate the cost of the demands of the things that the feminine left want, they have to stay in the realm of truth, because we know that the natural laws don't bend to our will. We have to, to command nature, it has to be obeyed. But obviously, once again, the systematic right brain masculine understands that the feminine left doesn't. So feminine left consistency is only inconsistency of demand for hyperconsumption, not costs of it, which just means they want to consume things. They have demands of the men, and they don't really understand the limits. They don't understand scarcity. They don't understand that sort of stuff. And so the way that ties in is, as I said to this guy one time, if you look at the behavior of women in choosing men, their behavior is indicative of defining gender roles themselves. They define gender roles just as much as men do in their choices. Well, you look at the implication of all this stuff with the feminine left brain, I think it can be very credibly implied. I think you can definitely say that if you look at the implication of all these things, the lack of calculating for costs and just the relentless demands for hyperconsumption of everything, they are demonstrating that they exist in a world where someone is above them and they have less agency. That with these sort of things, with politics and economics and larger scale things, women have a lot of agency in small things, especially emotionally within a tribe and community. But when it gets to these things, men and women are not equal. These larger things, they're not. Women in general, and the feminine left and women, the same sort of thing, the cognitively feminine people, they just don't demonstrate any ability to calculate costs of the things that they want. They don't demonstrate any ability to comprehend trade-offs, to have any respect for natural laws of scarcity and things like that. And so once again, the conclusion is that they really are not capable of operating on the same level, and they need to be led, and they need to be limited. How that plays out politically, Who knows? But you can enact that in your personal life. But once again, if you're gonna have that approach, you need to do it lovingly in your real life with feminine brained people, because being more empathetic brained, they are like an emotional sponge. If they feel like you're coming from an emotional place of anger or frustration at them, they will pick up on that extremely sensitively. So you need to, if you want to lead the feminine brains, you need to come from the position of, I have your best interests at heart, because whenever you're emotionally signaling that, that's what you'll communicate to them. But then lovingly, no, it doesn't work like that. You can't do that. I'm sorry, you can't do that. They need to be led and limited. But if they're part of your tribe, they need to be led and limited benevolently. Because, to go back to the start, all they do is live in a social world. They anthropomorphise everything. The beginning and ending of their consciousness almost is that it all is the result of other people. They live in a social world. And once again, people are a spectrum on this. It's not like women are incapable of walking out into the bush and pitching a tent. A lot of them are. But you do get more masculine women and less masculine women as well. But if you're a person and they're really heavily on that feminine spectrum of empathetic brain, then you just have to realize you're not dealing with somebody who is capable of politicking or philosophizing at the same level. It's like in that area you've got a child. You wouldn't let your kid drive the car because they're a kid. You know what I mean? It's just like, no, we don't let 3-year-olds drive cars. It's too much responsibility that's just way out of the scope of their abilities. So I think that's the same sort of approach you have to take.